Hey, welcome to Better Assholes. I'm your host, Sean, and here is a little something about something that's completely different than what we usually talk about. So I like to diversify my knowledge sometimes and what we talk about, right? So you don't always want to hear the same thing. Some podcasts are just people talking about the same thing over and over again, and you get familiar with the theme. I mean, same with the YouTube videos. Some channels that I've, subscribed to, they're interesting, but then you realize after a while it's the same thing again and again and again. So it's one thing to have maybe ideals and thoughts and you know just a whole kind of attitude about your channel and what you're doing and perceptions, your ideas, whatever it is, right? So a lot of people, you have a whole bunch of this, but it gets broken down into the same thing again and again and again. So, you could talk about the one conspiracy, the one game. Some people have a gaming channel and they're just talking about the one thing. So instead, we diversify a bit into different things. So today, what we're going to talk about, or this episode in particular, is wrestling. WWE wrestling, or formerly known as WWF, World Wrestling Federation Wrestling. So, I mean, if you're in your 40s or 50s, or, even older, you probably remember WWF. You remember Randy Macho Man Savage, Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, Mean Gene, the Iron Sheik, Jake the Snake, Roddy Rodder Piper. Oh man, I could go on for ages, but I'm not going to because I'm sure you remember. If not, you can look it up. If you're even listening to this, maybe you're somebody that watches wrestling right now and you already know the whole history. So that's okay. But it's nice to reminisce. And when you think about it, when you think about being an 8-year-old and sitting on your carpet, with your siblings, Saturday morning, watching WWF, getting hyped up, and then your parents telling you to stop jumping on the couches, stop beating up your siblings, and, get on with eating your cereal and get on with your day. So, you know, we all have that experience. That was the American dream or the Canadian dream. I think it was a North American, and it's very, at that time, it was very similar. WWF has always done a cross-border, Canadian American thing. So Canadians and Americans have the same memories of all the WWF activities from the 80s, right? Now the 90s, listen, I was a big WWF kid in the 80s because that's what it was when you grew up. I think in the 90s, so there was a time, I mean, you grew up, you got older, you weren't really paying attention to wrestling. Especially, when you're a teenager, you got your car, you're driving around, you're into girls. Nobody's watching wrestling at that age. And I think there was a bit of a time there where the WWF, I mean, they end up turning into WWE because of the World Wildlife Foundation, I think, lawsuit back then. So they had to change their name, figure something new out. And at that time, I think once the Hulk was gone, and once, the old wrestlers started dying off and getting arrested, and there were new guys, and it just, a lot of the old people, you grew out of it. At that time, you didn't have kids, right? You just grew out of it. The next generation wasn't too into it. My siblings, my younger siblings, after, if they were in maybe a 3 to 10 year range in any household, I mean, your siblings weren't into wrestling afterwards. So, there was a bit of time there it died out. Now, if we skip forward to, the late 90s, maybe 98, maybe 97, 98, 99, somewhere around there in that range, you had The Rock and Triple H, Generation X, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Goldberg, whatever. So you had a lot of popular guys. You had a resurgence. When you look at clips from the Attitude Era of WWF, it's insane. it's pretty much an R-rated show. I mean, the explicitives, the stuff they're calling each other, you know, the sexual nature, the violence, the nature of it in general is just pretty crazy. So it's night and day. I mean, you watch wrestling now, it's night and day. Back then, it was like watching an R-rated program. I mean, there was kind of some sexual stuff going on. There was some pretty violent stuff going on. There was some stuff that they were saying that was, straight out of a pretty hefty R-rated movie. So it was pretty crazy. Now, that was when, around the time me and my friends kind of got back, that university life where you have a bunch of friends and, we're at the age where the raunchiness of WWE at the time, that general raunchiness and being hyped, young adults, this was something we got into. We were jumping off of couches. We were going to bars, watching WWE and going into a park and just body slamming each other. So it was very popular. You had that, craziness of, older teens and that young adult population that got back into wrestling, got back into the Attitude Age. And that really propelled everything forward. That really got things moving for WWE. It became one of the most popular sporting events, known to men at that time. Better than baseball and basketball and whatever. They were making tons of money. The Rock was phenomenal. Stone Cold Austin, phenomenal. They made a whole bunch of money with that. Now, after those guys, I mean, years passed, after graduating and leaving and becoming a professional, wrestling was something again that was in the rearview mirror and didn't think about it, look at it, talk about it. It was something that I never thought I would revisit. When I fast forward maybe 10 years after that, or should I say maybe 10, 15 years after that, now, by the time I'm a father and I have my own kids, I look back at my childhood. I've seen some stuff on WWE. I look back at my childhood. A lot of my thought and my memory was the Attitude Era. A lot of what I wanted to give my son was the Hulk Hogan era at the beginning, right? But I know it passed. So we never kind of got in as my son and my daughter grew up. We never got into wrestling. We never watched it. We maybe briefed it once or twice, but never really got into it. He never had an interest. I never regained an interest. Now, fast forward, I mean, we just ignored it. And apparently it was really soft. It got soft. It got very G-rated. It wasn't fun. It was apparently pretty whack. So they had a stage in there. It was pretty weak. And then people came, I guess some people came back. You had John Cena's and whatever, Roman Reigns and a few guys, and it propelled again. So, I didn't watch, my kids didn't watch, nobody watched it. We never even fucking looked at it. The tipping point was there was an event. We watched F1. So there was some other events going on and there was a wrestling event. And we said, you know what? It's on. We're here. Let's just turn it on. So my wife and son got really into it. And then my daughter got into it as well. And it's a cross between, I think that the girls in my house really enjoyed the female wrestling, seeing the female wrestlers, seeing them hold their own. It's a different story than, back in the 90s because it's no longer, you know, girls that look like models wrestling in bikinis. It's pretty much, girls holding their own, right? From like fat girls to skinny girls to tall girls to short girls. It's almost like a Dr. Seuss book. So it has progressed and it's not like just a sideshow. There was a time where wrestling would be, say, 2 hours, a 2 hour show, and it would be men wrestling for an hour and 45 minutes, and then women for like 15 minutes. And it would be sexy women wearing not a lot of clothes, doing a lot of sexy type of wrestling, and that would be for that 15 minutes, and that would be it. So it's been big change to what it is now, having fully clothed women that come in different shapes and sizes, different skill levels, and are particularly good at wrestling. So it has changed. And that's, I believe, what kind of brought in my wife and daughter. I think that's what brings in a lot of women now, is the fact that out of a 2-hour wrestling show, an hour is women, an hour is men. And sometimes it's an hour and a half is women, and an hour is men, it seems. So it has changed. The game has changed. Wrestling has become a very, very different place. And so, as we see, it brings in people. When my family was watching wrestling, I thought they were crazy. There was actually a time where I couldn't figure out why they were spending time watching Raw, watching SmackDown, getting ready for WrestleMania, getting ready for Royal Rumble. And I have my other things to do. So I'm just there watching this stuff on TV and I'm doing something else. And slowly, as they're watching, I'm slowly getting into it. I hear it going off in the background and see action my side view. And eventually you kind of understand the characters and see where, things are going. You understand the fact that it's not necessarily real, it's scripted. They're still doing moves. They're still making amazing amount of, uh, jumping around, I don't know, acrobatic maneuvers and hitting each other, kicking each other. So they are getting hurt. You see guys bleeding. You see things happening. So it is, realistic to a degree. But what makes it really, interesting is the storylines, the camaraderie. Uh, they really play for the audience. So once you start watching it, you start understanding it, you start having favorites, and it becomes like a big soap opera. And that's what also pulls in, I guess, women, right? Big soap opera nature of it's not just wrestling, but they have a storyline, and it continues episode to episode, week to week, and who knows, sometimes event to event. So it is very interesting at this stage. So 2025, yes, wrestling is going to be really big, especially WWE. For 2025, their Raw program, which I think is their most popular program, has moved to Netflix, and their whole archives from the WWE network has moved to Netflix. So therefore, you don't have to worry about, finding out in your area. In Canada, it was like Sportsnet. In the US, it was the USA Network. And trying to find who's hosting it, battling through commercials, battling through other issues, having a different package or needing a computer to see, some of the archive footage. And, it's just a pain. So now everything's in one spot. It's on Netflix. And I think this is going to go very well. The next step is I could see they're going to do main event and probably SmackDown on Netflix in the future because there's no point to keep with the network. For me, it was a pain in the ass watching Raw on Netflix and then going to USA Network to watch, SmackDown. So are we going to be on Netflix for SmackDown? 100%, 100%, because I'm sure people are loving it. There was no issues, with some of their other events going on Netflix. We've watched, well, not the events, but we've watched some videos, we watched some old matches. Everything was streaming fine. Things looked good. It was very convenient. The menus were good. So this is something we'll see more of in the future, I bet. So we're just waiting, right? But 2025 is going to be a year where WWE is going to grow. Wrestling in itself is going to grow. UFC is going to grow. Now that we're getting out of, this woke era, we're going to start seeing more fighting, more racing, and more sports that are enjoyed by a lot of people without the wokeness. I'm Sean Empire, and thank you for listening to Better Assholes.